In the autumn of 1851, deep in a narrow valley of North Carolina's Blue Ridge Mountains, 31 children from a single one-room schoolhouse walked through a gap in the ridge on a clear Tuesday morning. They were never seen as normal children again. 6 days later, 4 of them stumbled out of the woods, barefoot, silent. Their hair had turned white at the temples. The other 27 have remained, in official records, missing for 175 years. The county ledger called it a weather accident. The church called it an act of God. The 4 survivors refused to speak of it until the last of them died in a state asylum in 1928. The story itself was something the county tried to bury 3 times. The marker at the hollow's entrance was removed in 1889. The schoolhouse was burned in 1902. The land was sold and resold until no one alive could point to where the children had gone. Before we go further, what you're about to hear comes from a diary that a granddaughter handed to a historian in 1971. Its contents have never been read aloud before. To understand what happened on October 21, 1851, you first need to understand Ashcam. It wasn't a real town, just a scatter of about 40 farmhouses, a Presbyterian meeting hall used as a school, a blacksmith, a grist mill, and a general store. The people were Scots, Irish, and German, 2nd or 3rd generation families who'd come down from Pennsylvania. They farmed tobacco and corn, kept hogs, and made whiskey. Winters were brutal. Summers were thick with moisture. They were pious, wary of outsiders, and they remembered everything, including the stories the old ones told about the land above the creek. The hollow itself sat about a mile and a quarter east of the meeting hall. An 1847 survey map called it Ashcam Hollow, after the first family. But by 1851, locals used the older name, a Cherokee word meaning roughly, the place where the ground remembers. The Cherokee had been driven out in 1838. What they'd known of the land survived only as fragments of warning. Don't send children up that hollow after dark. Hunters avoided it in late autumn. A settler named Josiah Veach had nailed a wooden cross to a beech tree at the path's entrance in 1829. He told neighbors it marked a boundary, but never said of what. An older German who'd sold him the land had once said, in broken English, "You do not cross this mark at dusk, and you do not send a child across it alone. Not for any reason, not for any price." The schoolteacher was a 24-year-old woman named Evangeline Trout. She'd come from Salisbury, the daughter of a Methodist circuit rider. She was thin, fair, and possessed a quiet authority that surprised the older men. She boarded above the general store and was engaged by letter to a seminary student in New Jersey. She kept a small leather diary. The children she taught numbered 33, ranging from 6 to 14. The oldest was a quiet 14-year-old named Absalom Ravenel who read the Bible aloud with astonishing steadiness. The youngest was a 6-year-old girl named Comfort Pettigrew, who carried a rag doll named Susanna everywhere. Among the others were twins cousins, a girl who stammered, a boy terrified of water, and a girl who'd won a ribbon for her stitching. On the morning of October 21st, 2 children were absent. That left 31. The decision to take them into the hollow was Miss Trout's. She'd recorded the reason 3 days earlier. A traveling naturalist, a Bavarian botanist named Dr. Emmerich Kohl, had passed through and spoken at supper about a rare orchid that bloomed in late October in shaded coves. He'd shown her a pressed specimen, greenish, white, veined with dark purple, with petals shaped almost like lips. She found it enchanting. She decided a walk to gather autumn leaves, and perhaps find the orchid would be a better lesson than a week of reading from a primer. She chose the hollow because it was the nearest cove with the right conditions. As far as her diary shows, she knew nothing about the cross on the beech tree, the old Cherokee name, or Josiah Veach's sleepless nights. If anyone in town knew her plan, no one warned her. The widow she boarded with later said she'd assumed Miss Trout meant to go only as far as the beech tree. By the time she realized the teacher intended to go further to the spring, it was already dusk on the 21st, and there was nothing to be done. The weather that morning was clear and cold. Frost in the shadows, a thin yellow sun. The children were wildly happy. They ran ahead. Miss Trout walked at the back with the two oldest girls. By 9 a.m., they'd passed Josevich's cornfield. By 9:30, they'd passed the beech tree with the cross. And then Miss Trout's diary goes silent for 6 days. The alarm wasn't raised until nearly dusk. By midnight, 40 men with lanterns and 2 hounds were searching. By morning, the whole settlement was in the woods. Women prayed in the meeting hall. The blacksmith didn't fire his forge for 6 days. The grist mill stopped. What the search parties found, or rather, didn't find, was recorded in 3 separate accounts. The children had gone about 3/4 of a mile up the hollow to a small clearing with a spring. There were signs they'd stopped apple cores, cloth bundles folded neatly on a flat rock, a pair of small shoes set side by side, a pale blue ribbon, an unbroken slate pencil. No trail led out. The ground showed no prints. The hounds refused to enter the clearing. One lay down at the edge and whined. Another bit the man who tried to drag it across. The search continued for 11 days. They found almost nothing. One searcher found a neat stack of small stones. Beneath it was a single braid of brown hair tied with red wool, his own daughter's. He took it home and burned it. He never told the others. On the 6th day, a woman hauling water from the creek saw movement on the far bank. 4 children were standing in the shallows, knee-deep, facing upstream. They didn't move when she called. Their hair had turned white at the temples. Their clothes were clean, spotlessly clean, as if laundered and pressed. After 6 days missing in the woods, the 4 children were Thaddeus Orrs, age 9, Mercy Eakins, 11, Phineas Tracy, 8, and Absalom Ravenels, 4, 12. They were separated into different houses. They did not speak. They ate when food was put in front of them, slept when led to bed, walked when walked. They did not respond to their own names or the voices of their parents. Absalom's mother said that when he finally turned his head toward her, his eyes were not his eyes. Whatever was looking out was not her son. A doctor arrived 2 days later. He found them in perfect physical health. No wounds, no signs of exposure, weight unchanged. Their pulses were abnormally slow. They did not blink at bright lights. They did not flinch at a pistol fired in the next room. He wrote that they were not catatonic. They were simply somewhere else. And whatever had taken them there had sent back something that didn't entirely know how to be a child. Over the following weeks, 3 of the 4 began to return in varying degrees. Phineas, age 8, was first. He said, "Mama," and cried for 3 hours. He seemed to believe it was still summer and that he'd been ill. He recovered outwardly, but would not sleep without a lamp, would not eat apples, and would not walk east, toward the mountains. Mercy came back more slowly. She began to speak in March. She had a habit of asking whether the singing had stopped. When pressed, she said it wasn't the family hymns. It was the other singing, the one that keeps on. She was the only one who spoke obliquely of what was in the hollow. On her deathbed, she said, "We could not keep up with the others, and they went on without us. We were the ones who fell behind." I do not know if that was a kindness or a curse. Thaddeus came back in pieces, speaking, then falling silent, then speaking again. The pattern became the shape of his life: silent in autumns, nearly normal in springs and summers. He was eventually committed to an asylum after walking 10 miles east toward the old settlement in an autumn silence. Absalom never came back at all. He never spoke. He never responded. He lived in an upper room of his parents' house, then with an uncle, then in the state asylum for 57 years. He was known as the Silent Man. He ate what was put in front of him. He walked when walked. He did not acknowledge mirrors or loud sounds. But every year on October 21st, between 3 and 5 p.m., he would stand at his window and face east for 2 hours, then sit back down. He did this every year from 1871 to 1927. He died on February 3, 1928, at age 91. The day nurse wrote that at 6 minutes past 3 in the afternoon, the Silent Man opened his eyes and said in a perfectly clear voice 3 words, "They are coming." Then he closed his eyes and died. The question of what happened in the clearing consumed the settlement for a generation. It consumed the teacher's fiancé, who wrote a 400-page manuscript. It consumed the reverend, who preached an annual sermon on the anniversary until his death. It consumed Josiah Veach, who went slowly mad and hanged himself in 1861 with a note pinned to his shirt. "Only I should have cut down the tree. I should have cut it down in 1830. Forgive me." And then in 1971, Evangeline Trute's diary surfaced. The graduate student who received it believed it would be the final answer. It was not. The diary showed that Miss Trute had begun walking up the hollow alone on Saturday afternoons that summer. On August 16th, she heard a sound, like voices singing, just below the threshold of comprehension. She wasn't frightened. She assumed it was farmers talking beyond the ridge. But by late August, she began to doubt that explanation. The sound had the rhythm of singing, though no tune she could place. By September, she was going up the hollow 3 times a week. She called it the singing. Then simply, on an October 6th, she took the 2 oldest children with her, Absalom and Mercy, because she wanted to know if the singing was audible to others. They heard it, both of them. Absalom sat on the flat rock for a full hour, fascinated. On October 13th, she took 4 children. One of them, a girl who normally stammered, spoke without any stammer at all and asked, "If they are not inside the rock, then where are they?" On the night of October 20th, Miss Trute wrote her final entry. She confessed that she had not told Dr. Cole, the botanist, that she had already taken children into the hollow twice before. She had not told him that Absalom had said the singing had words in it, asking the children to come closer, but only the children, because she was too old. She had not told him that little Verity said the voices were beneath the stones, and that they were lonely. She had not told him that 2 of the younger children had not wanted to leave. She wrote that she was certain that taking all 31 children as a school outing was the right course. That the sound had a natural cause. That the children's fancies would dissolve in the light of understanding. She wrote that there was a wind in the eaves that night, and for a moment she thought she heard the singing again, though they were 1.25 miles from the hollow, which is of course impossible. That was her last entry. She was never seen again. Her body was never recovered. The graduate student, Hollister Vance, traveled to the site in 1972 with a geologist. They found a limestone formation beneath the clearing with narrow fissures. When the wind is right and the creek is full, those fissures produce a continuous, soft sound pitched in a range that children's ears interpret as voices. It resembles singing or conversation or, in certain weather, the thin crying of infants, a natural phenomenon. Not dangerous by itself, but Vance also found something else. In county records, he discovered previous disappearances, 17 separate incidents between 1789 and 1850. A hunter, 2 children found a week later silent, both dead within a year. A peddler whose abandoned cart was found at the beech tree. A mill hand. 2 brothers hunting turkey, only one returned, and he hanged himself 3 weeks later. The pattern was not random. The incidents clustered in late autumn, after wet summers, and in years when the settlement's population had increased. as though the hollow were responding to pressure or to opportunity. Vance also found the original Cherokee translation, not the place where the ground remembers, but more precisely, the place that keeps what it takes. An 1889 ethnographic record noted a Cherokee prohibition against bringing children to the clearing in numbers greater than one. The ethnographer had dismissed it as superstition. Vance, with the diary in front of him, understood the specificity exactly. 1 child at a time, never more. Miss Trude had brought 2, then 4, then 31. Vance came to believe that the sound was not the cause of the disappearances. It was the lure. Something else in that place, something he could not name, used the sound to draw prey, and the prey it preferred, the pattern confirmed, was children. He found one final piece of evidence. On the afternoon of February 3, 1928, at the exact minute Absalom Ravenel spoke his last words and died, another patient in the same asylum died as well. A woman named Orpha Queel, 63 years old, who had been silent and unresponsive for her entire decade at the asylum. She opened her eyes and said the same 3 words, "They are coming," then closed her eyes and died. Vance traced her history. She had appeared in Asheville in 1893, walking down the mountain road alone, dressed in fragments of a child's pinafore. She was 48 years old. She could not give her name. She carried one small object, a pressed flower, greenish, white, veined with dark purple, an orchid that did not grow in North Carolina and had never been catalogued by any botanist. The flower Dr. Cole had shown Miss Trude on the evening of October 15, 1851. Vance traced the woman further. Dental records. A small birthmark on her left wrist. It matched precisely a birthmark described in Miss Trude's diary from the spring of 1851. On her youngest pupil, 6-year-old Comfort Pettigrew, who had carried a rag doll named Susanna into the hollow, and who had walked further into the clearing than any of the others. Orpha Queel had been Comfort Pettigrew. She had walked into the hollow at age 6 in 1851. She had walked out at age 48 in 1893, 42 years later, carrying a flower that should not have existed. She lived another 35 years in silence, and she died at the exact same moment as Absalom Ravenel, speaking his same last words. Vance burned his manuscript in 1978. A carbon copy survived. The historian who now owns it has no intention of publishing it. She has been to the site once. She will not go again. She believes the clearing is still there. The spring still runs. In the right weather, the fishers still sing. And the other 27 children are still, in some sense she does not wish to articulate, unaccounted for. One final detail. In 2006, a hiker on the Appalachian Trail became disoriented in fog and wandered off trail. He came upon a small clearing with a spring, about half an acre. He heard what he took to be children singing, though he saw no children. He sat on a flat rock for what he thought was 15 minutes, listening. When he found his way back to the trail, 2 groups of hikers told him different dates. When he reached the ranger station, he learned that 4 days had passed. He had no memory of where he'd been. In his pack was a small pressed flower, greenish, white, veined with dark purple. He did not remember picking it. The flower was never identified. His hair went white at the temples the following year. He lives in Ohio. He does not return phone calls. In a small private cemetery in western North Carolina, there is a marker with no name. Only a date, October 21, 1851, and one word lost. A descendant of the Ashcam family paid to have it erected in 1951, exactly 100 years after the walk. She told the stonemason she had been haunted all her life by a feeling that came strongest in the late autumn. A feeling as though, just below the threshold of hearing, a group of voices were singing and calling her by name and asking her to come closer. Only the children, they said. Only the children. But she had never been a child again since the day she learned the story. and so she was safe. She hoped that by raising the stone, she might somehow discharge the debt owed to the 27 who had gone and never came back.